evening. Hope you can all hear me clearly. I hope I've turned it on. My name's Tim Hancock. I'm the South West Regional Chairman for the RIBA, and I'm just going to do some quick introductions tonight. I'm not the main event, so you'll be pleased to hear. Quickly, basically, thank you very much for coming tonight. And it's, we're here about the Plymouth Plan, and I'll talk a little bit more in a minute. But first, housekeeping. Fire exits, basically where you came in. Toilets, gents are on the left as we look out now. Ladies are on the back, on the right. Mobile phones. Now, this is going to be a technical interest for yourselves. I don't want them to be on in terms of sounding and ringing, what have you, but we do want to encourage you to tweet for those that have got Twitter accounts. It's hashtag Plymouth Plan, and that'd be great if you could tweet at the event and what have you. We are being webcast, so in the spirit of Davina, please do not swear. Please do not be too controversial with the people that are there and heckle, but we do want this to be a lively debate and constructive. So, the event is being organised by Plymouth Branch of the Royal Institute of British Architects in partnership with Plymouth City Council, and it's to discuss and to contribute towards the creation of the emerging Plymouth Plan and identify appropriate opportunities to change the future of Plymouth for the better, we hope. The aim of the event is, as I said, to hold a lively and constructive discussion. This is what it's meant to be about, focusing on the future development of urban regeneration of Plymouth. The basic format for the event is we have got 3 key speakers in the first instance. We will then be having a 5-minute recess. That's just a comfort break, stretch your legs, what have you. And then we're actually going to have, hopefully, quite a lively question time debate. And that's where we'll follow on, and basically our chairman will be concluding later on, and Jonathan, your city branch chair for the RIBA Plymouth Branch chair, will be concluding, and hopefully later on you'll be staying for some drinks and a light buffet reception at the end. If we all keep to our timings, we should be finished and wrapped up around about 8:30, but we want it to be an interactive debate. So, moving on quickly, I would like to introduce our first speaker, and it is, and I'm going to get this wrong most probably, but it's Anthony Clarici. Yep. I've had 4 different ways of saying his name this afternoon. Anthony is the Vice President of Membership for the Royal Institute of British Architects. He's a practicing architect, and he is also he teaches urban design workshops in Birmingham, and has been a practice examiner for the RBA at the Braddick School of Architecture. So I'd like to just pass over to Anthony.
This is on. Good. Right. Good evening. Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to Plymouth. I only found out I was going to be here a few days ago, so I've had a very steep learning curve into rediscovering Plymouth in my own mind. My experience of Plymouth is probably like many others. It tends to be on my motorbike heading to the ferry and back again. And maybe the only stop is at Sainsbury's near the A38 to get petrol, which is a bit sad, really. I've sort of found that I've actually had Bilbao as a destination in my mind more than Plymouth. And those of you probably know about Bilbao and Guggenheim and the rest of it, but I've been there twice, and I've not really been to Plymouth as a visitor, which is not very good. So my research, which is very unscientific, is a very quick survey. Friends, people at the RIBA last week, people at Birmingham City University School of Architecture and Landscape, just walked up and said, "What do you think of Plymouth? What's there?" And it's not a destination. I think that's one of the most common things that people have said, that it's not a destination. And I understand that recently the city has employed someone whose role is going to be to do with Plymouth as a destination. Maybe there are problems with the Navy. Well, we keep on hearing about defence cuts. I suppose one of the bits of my research is that 10% of Plymouth is to do with the Navy, 2,500 jobs, 400 companies. So it's quite a big chunk of what happens. I just wondered, is there anybody from MOD or Navy here? Okay, they might be here but won't put their hands up, but that's okay. That's interesting for me as well. But it's got the most incredible coastline, incredible place to be, but difficult to sort of get that because it's not a destination. So I don't know what the solution is, but this is how it is. And of course, it's got the history. It's got the Hoe, Pilgrim Fathers. Again, I don't understand why the place isn't crawling with Americans. Maybe because they can't get here. Maybe that's part of the issue is connectivity with major airports or whatever. So as I said, most of my experience, and a lot of others, is actually getting to Brittany Ferries. The difficult one is a couple of people said, well, it hasn't got any landmarks. Isn't that the place with the spinnaker? Well, of course it's not. That's that other place down the coast. But how can people get Portsmouth and Plymouth muddled up in their heads? It's pretty fundamental, but this is what happens. But if you look at Lonely Planet, it talks about a city that's slowly improving. Maybe that's slightly damning in itself, but things are happening in the right direction. So here we go. I started thinking, well, what's wrong with Plymouth? You've got the 2003 vision. It's slowly improving, but where's it going to? I would argue that 2003 is a long time ago in terms of thinking about cities. Sustainability was just a sort of glint in people's minds at that time. It wasn't really part of the whole thing, and lots of other issues. So although you're looking backwards to the 2003 plan, I think it's interesting how much weight you actually apply to that plan. And then there are all the agendas. There are all the obvious ones: housing, commerce, the Navy. The bit you can't see says airport. And one of the dangers is that I'm nervous about people with a single agenda. I think it's very easy if you have a single agenda and you want to deliver something and you don't have to think about what other people have to do. And maybe that's, as an architect, that I'm very aware of, that I might meet someone who's concerned about protecting bats, and the next minute I'll be meeting the counter-terrorism officer on the same project, and both need to have the right solutions. So here we are. Economic context is pretty bad. I think I read 7,000 unemployed, Navy reducing, and within the context of, is it a destination? Incidentally, Bristol was £9 million tourism last year. Right, don't check that, but that's one of the websites. I think Plymouth had 250,000 visitors. So there's incredible disparity, even in what people in London might think of as the southwest. Coming from Worcester, I don't really believe that. I know a bit more of the geography than beyond the London tube map. So there is this vicious circle that's sort of stalled, and maybe that's what's happened. You've had the plan for 10 years. It's not really happened. There are lots of economic reasons why things aren't happening. So maybe that's why we're here today, is trying to break that circle. And I don't think anything should happen unless you have got a clear vision. And that's the most difficult thing to arrive at. And it needs to be done together. And that's also a difficult process. I'm actually not really going to talk about process and design quality, because I sort of think that's a done deal. Given the right vision and the right people and the right budget and the right time frame, it's all right if you say it quickly, isn't it? You'd end up with appropriate schemes, good quality schemes. And I know Isabel, for example, is going to talk about some of that process in a minute, so I don't need to go through that. But one example near me is Birmingham. They've had their big city plan. It's been around for a number of years. Can't afford to do everything. They, for example, had a competition for the Jury Quarter, Golden Triangle. Golden Square? No, it's a Golden Square competition, but the actual plan is a triangular shape. I've never quite understood that. And East Side, which is something which has been in the AJ a couple of weeks ago, is part of a park which begins to connect things together. But if you look at the top two pictures, these were only taken this week, it's still pretty dire in places, very, very close to the city centre. You've got undeveloped sites, you've got vast areas of open green grass. Walking up to the Hoe just now, there are quite large areas of very open green grass. But Eastside Park is slotting in, and it's maybe that's an approach. It's understanding the whole, but what's affordable. Maybe it is an incremental slotting high quality schemes in within that overall plan. But you need to talk to the stakeholders, and I hope we've got a lot of stakeholders here today. But we also need good consultation, and that's quite an art. Again, Isabel's going to talk a little bit more about that. But beware, she's got a zillion slides about consultation, which is part 2 if we get to it. As mentioned before, we're on Twitter, and there's a webcast happening now, so hopefully people out there will be watching, and they will be typing away on their PCs. So one thing I was involved with a few years ago was in Poland, where they don't have a sort of background of consultation for planning issues. It used to be the state obviously changed your light bulb and everything beyond. So we had students out for a whole weekend dealing with local population about one street. And the effort that went into that was incredible in terms of public boards where people could write comments, engaging with the public, balloons, guerrilla gardens, on the local telly, on the local radio. And it needs that sort of effort to get something back. And I don't think having a blog or two is good enough these days. Engagement needs to be very thought through and given the right sort of resources to make it work. And it's a fantastic amount of fun. It really is amazing. And what we ended up with, you don't really need to read all the writing, but we had the most amazing off-the-wall comments. The one I remember was an old guy said, "I'd like to see the stars." And you could throw that away as being a stupid comment, or actually that might be an inspiration for a design. It might be inspiration for a lighting design. It might be to do with how he wants to live in the city. So going back to the vision is really, I think the problem now is what actually is the criteria. What do you want to major on anything, like sustainable city, or is it going to be an economic solution? And the ways forward are maybe to look at good models elsewhere. I've mentioned Bilbao already. Malmo, to name one of many, has now evidence of quality of life, which has come out of the way they treated sustainability and the way they treated design. So real things like the number of push-bike journeys, the way they manage water, and all that is completely attainable. So it depends what images and what visions you want. So this is Malmo. So maybe we're moving from the old, for the architects we know this, firmness, commodity and delight, through to things which are perhaps in a more sort of current language. But I do like the bottom line. It should do something. That's the vision. It should stand up, which we can all make things stand up, unlike in China perhaps. But it should look good. So that's using the right people, the right architects and urban designers to deliver this. But never forgetting that people are the most important component. And if we forget about the people, then nothing's going to happen. So thank you. Next is Paul. Thank you.
Paul necessarily needs too much of an introduction, but Paul is Assistant Director of Planning of the Plymouth City Council.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try and give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the planning of the city. These are some of the things I'm going to cover. A very quick sort of look back, but to just correct sort of one thing you said, this is any plan process is about looking forward in the city, not looking back, and it's important that we remember that whilst making sure that we draw on the lessons and the experiences of delivering what we've done in the past. So I'll say a bit about the strategic context. I'll also say something about the delivery to date. And people might have some views about the delivery since the Mackey Vision was produced in November 2003. But nevertheless, it's important to reflect on the fact that what has been delivered, because that's an important part of the learning process as well. And then I'll quickly talk about the Plymouth Plan, what it is, what I think it needs to do, what I think some of the big issues are, but it'll be interesting to see in the debate what you think the issues are. So, probably everyone's familiar with this. This is the 1943 Abercrombie Plan, a plan that people were writing as bombs were dropping, so we don't quite have that problem, but a very inspirational plan, and one that people will be familiar with this diagram, which was obviously about laying out the city centre, and it was one of the biggest compulsory purchase orders at the time to rebuild the city of Plymouth, which had a reputation pre-war as one of the most congested and therefore consequently inefficient cities in the UK. But perhaps as we look around the city centre today, we can also see how those visions can get dissipated over time. So visions are absolutely crucial, and that's a fundamental part of plan making, but so is a focus on making sure that that vision isn't dissipated. But I wanted to sort of pick up on the theme of neighbourhoods, because a lesser, perhaps well-known part of the Abercrombie Plan was the planning that it did for rehousing the population of the city, which obviously had been severely affected by the significant bombing that had occurred in the war. And there was a substantial amount of thought that went into that plan about the creation of sustainable neighbourhoods. And again, we can look at the experiences of that today as we look at the neighbourhoods around the city and the very leafy neighbourhoods that exist to the north of the A38, but perhaps some of the issues around the density of those neighbourhoods and consequently the difficulties of those neighbourhoods supporting the corner shop, the bus service, and community facilities, all of which I'll say a bit more about later on. And I thought this might be quite an interesting quote. Some say the real author behind the Abercrombie Plan, the engineer Peyton Watson. You can see the comment there. I won't read it out, but I thought this was quite an interesting observation. It was from an interview that was done in 1976, and you can see there's a couple of sort of themes in that. One was the importance of neighbourhoods and neighbourhood planning. You might reflect on that in the context of the current government's approach to neighbourhood planning, such as it is. And you might also reflect on some of the comments there about the ability of neighbourhoods and communities to make decisions about their areas. So I thought that was quite an interesting observation. So, 2003, a cross-sector group of local architects, developers, agents, the City Council, other partners, I think recognised that Plymouth wasn't punching its weight. There was a general feeling that it could be more than it was, and that's where David Mackey was commissioned to take a look at the city and see what the opportunities for taking the city forward were. And he produced then in 2003, through quite a, probably the word I'd use is empathetic process of discussion and dialogue with a number of stakeholders, produced this plan, which set out, it was interesting that he was originally commissioned to look at the whole of the city, but very interestingly focused down on the city centre, as you can see, and in particular some of the waterfront parts of the city, in particular Mill Bay and Sutton Harbour. And in essence, what this plan said, if you were trying to describe it in one sentence, it was Plymouth's not big enough. It needs a bigger critical mass to support services. It needs to take a fundamental relook at its city centre. And there are opportunities for the intensification of the city centre and opportunities for a different form of development. So probably the most... that works, does it? No. You can probably see the boulevard there linking Mill Bay and the city centre. So there was obviously drawing upon things like La Rambla in Barcelona. So this sort of makes that point that a feeling that the offer of Plymouth could be something better. And so that's what David Mackey was sort of drawing upon in terms of where he was taking the city forward. Now, the other important point to make is that was a vision. That was produced. It did result in some quite brave decisions, one of which was within 6 months of that plan being not only produced by David Mackey, but it being adopted by the City Council as a statement of its planning policy. Also within 6 months, £1.9 million was diverted from the council's capital programme to deliver what is now the crossing across Royal Parade and the piazza that exists there, with all the events that have occurred there since 2003. And that was one of the suggestions that David Mackey himself made. But it's important to make the point that it would have just remained a vision, an important piece of analysis, but just that, if the City Council, obviously as a planning authority, but also being responsible for economic development and transport planning, didn't embed those principles that were set out in the Mackey vision into its various plans that you can see there. So an important point to make is that the vision is obviously important in developing where you're trying to go, but that's got to actually mean something in terms of actual interventions across the whole city, and there are some sort of listed on that slide. Right, so what did that all add up to? Well, it added up to a significant, so you can see the Mackey vision there in the bottom left-hand corner. It meant looking at the role of regeneration areas within the city. It meant looking at, in the order of 42,000 jobs in 6 key economic sectors. It meant significant new retail development. It meant 32,000 new homes. And it meant growing the population of the city, along with most other English cities at that time that were losing population, to actually increase the critical mass of the city through to 300,000. In fact, David referred to the city potentially growing to 350,000 over the long term. And in essence, what it was, and this was the sort of phrase that David used at the time, delivering what he called a step change in the quality, pace, and intensity of development within the city. And that, in essence, sort of captured what the thinking was. Now, as I said, that was all, if you like, desperately interesting, but where was the growth going to happen? And so what became the core strategy, which is effectively the Plymouth Plan that we're now embarking on producing, that was adopted in 2007, embedded that growth agenda that David Mackey sort of put in place, and focused growth in 3 key areas: the waterfront areas, waterfront renaissance of Devonport, Mill Bay, the city centre, Sutton Harbour, and Central Park. Secondly, major expansion to the east of the city, so Plymouth Stock Quarry, Who Lake Quarry, and Sherford. And then thirdly, the recently published plans for major development to the north of the city around Derriford. So those were all embedded in the core strategy. So let's move on quickly to delivery. As you can see from that slide, the population was rising. The number of homes being created was rising. The amount of employment land that was being delivered to create jobs was rising. But as you'll see from the black line is jobs created, although a substantial number of jobs, about 9,000, were created in the period up to and including 2006. Obviously, since 2006, and in relation to the impacts of the current recession, those have effectively all been wiped out. So there is a major challenge for somewhere like Plymouth, given its locality, the largest city on the south coast, to actually achieve job creation. And that slide just shows that those plans were in the process of being delivered towards that population that we talked about. So although it's not about people, just about people, because clearly if you just have population growth without economic growth, that would create effectively a dependent city. It's not just about growth of the economy without growth in the population. There are many examples around the city, around the country, of cities that are overheated because they cannot meet their population needs within their tightly drawn boundaries. It's about bringing those two things together, which includes creating a quality city in relation to how you translate that vision to delivery on the ground. So we called that, and back to the theme of neighbourhoods, we called that sustainable linked communities. So all of the neighbourhoods within the city have been surveyed. We know how they function. We know what the character of those areas are, and that forms an important evidence base, all of which incidentally is on the City Council's website. That forms an important evidence base of real information produced in partnership with local communities in relation to the nature of those areas and some of the planning challenges in those areas. So, back to the point I made earlier about the critical mass of population, significant elements that make that up in terms of the size of the population, things being within reasonable walking distance, it being well connected, there being a mixture of uses, a balanced community, and a safe place to live. All these basic fundamentals that make a place. And some of you might recognise this particular illustration, which comes from the Urban Task Force publication of '99, I think it was, which basically sought to describe how you create sustainable places. So what does some of the analysis show? It shows that some parts of the city have insufficient catchments of population, so that raises issues about the deliverability of services. Some parts have insufficient job opportunities, so there's issues about the provision of local employment facilities, including social enterprises. And incredibly, in a first world city, we have neighbourhoods where if you live in one part of the city, you die 15 years before somebody who lives on the eastern side of the city, which are pretty fundamental things, I would suggest. So, the Plymouth Plan, what does it need to do, therefore? It needs to, I think, be aspirational. There was a point that was touched upon earlier. But it also has to be deliverable. We are taking the view that it has to be one holistic, integrated plan, a strategic plan for the city. And the function of that plan is to ensure that the investment priorities deliver the vision. Because self-evidently, if a investment opportunity does not deliver the vision, then that is not something that is actually helping the city move forward. It needs to articulate, I think, Plymouth's role within this region and the sub-region. It certainly needs to corral some of the large number of strategies that have been produced by many organisations over the years. But it needs to continue that delivery that I mentioned earlier. So I don't know if you can see the titles on that slide, but this comes from some research we've done in a city called Portland, Oregon, where they've sought to bring some of these things together in a joined-up way in the plan that they're developing for their city, which has some significant population and other challenges. So we're trying to bring those things together in the Plymouth Plan. But we've also trying to excite people. I'm told that this WTF means something, but I'm too old to know what that means. So we're trying to engage people in a debate, in a discussion about what the Plymouth Plan should do and say. So, what are some of the big issues? Well, I've talked about the role of the city in the region. That is a significant issue. That might pick up issues of economic, perceived economic peripherality. It might raise issues about the economic role of somewhere like Plymouth, given its history. I think I'm right in saying that Bristol is the only major English city in the top 50 of economically high-performing cities across Europe. So given that most analysis shows that cities are absolutely crucial to the overall UK economy, there's a crucial role there to play that cities can play. I think one of the challenges, as I hinted at earlier, was the creation of jobs, the health inequalities point I made. And because of the way in which the population of the UK is changing quite significantly, but that's particularly also happening in Plymouth, there are going to be some significant questions about how we design cities for people who are getting older. The percentage that are going to be above 85 is going to be very scary, and there are all sorts of social and accessibility issues that go with some of that. There's a continuing need for Plymouth to meet its housing needs in all its various forms. This country is building, and hasn't built for many years, a sufficient number of homes to address housing need. But there's also an issue about fuel poverty and the quality of housing, as you'll see from a quote later on. But there's also issues about retailing. Retailing is a big challenge for local centres, but it's a big challenge for the city centre itself. We have inherited a Beaux-Arts, if you like, gridiron pattern layout to the city centre. There is a uniqueness to that. There is a character that goes with that. but there are some basic economic realities that also go with that. How can that city centre play a role to meet modern retailing needs when the amount of retailing that's going through the internet now has reached 16% and projected to go significantly higher? How does Plymouth plan for moving towards a more sustainable city? It is actually in most of the indices that are done by the World Wildlife Fund and others, one of the more sustainable English cities. But how does it do that? How does it plan to address issues of the over-reliance on carbon and issues generally around climate change, something that is relevant to Plymouth given its 13 miles of coastal frontage? I think there's also an issue about neighbourhoods. Back to the theme of neighbourhoods, there is an issue about how these plans can actually more strongly support local neighbourhoods in local communities planning for the particular needs that they've identified in their neighbourhoods. And as you're probably aware, there are certain provisions in the Localism Act that allow neighbourhoods to take a greater role in the planning of their areas. And, of course, there's the perennial issue of how do we fund infrastructure when there is a general recognition that the historical legacy of some of the planning decisions of the 50s, 60s and 70s is that pieces of infrastructure, whether we're talking about community parks or roads or community facilities, are just not there. How do we fund that? So that's what I thought the big strategic issues are. Some others might think some of these are the strategic issues. There's clearly an ongoing question about Plymouth Airport and the future of the airport land. There's issues about worklessness. That clearly affects the economy of the city. There are issues about the unique historic environment that Plymouth has, particularly because a lot of that historic environment was obviously lost during the war. There's some issues about green spaces, the protection of those green spaces, and perhaps even the enhancement of green spaces. 43% of Plymouth's land area is actually green space. It's one of the greenest cities in the country. There's an ongoing issue about regeneration of areas. There's a massive programme of regeneration in North Prospect. There's been a massive programme of regeneration in Devonport. How do we ensure that we continue to support those neighbourhoods? As I've hinted, there's a big set of questions around technology. It may surprise you that if we looked at the plans of the 1980s or the 1990s, did they predict the rise and the significance of computers and the way in which people use computers in their daily lives? No, they didn't. So what is the challenge from new technology? And I think part of that will be different travel patterns that go alongside some of that. And. There are probably lots of things that you're thinking about right now that I've not mentioned that you might think that the plan has to address. So that's the vision that we're currently working to. That comes from the work that David Mackey did, and that is the vision. Is that still the right vision? Should the vision be modified in any way? How does that vision translate on the ground? Have indeed the changes that I've referred to, have those changes actually helped move towards that vision? I won't bore you with a great long list of all the projects that have been delivered since 2006 in the city, but there are many of them. So to what extent have those addressed some of the issues I've touched upon? To what extent have they not addressed some of those issues? And I guess crucially, for anyone reading this plan, at any point between now and when the plan is finalised, how would you consider that the vision of the plan is being achieved? That's probably one of the ultimate tests for any plan. And sort of linked to that, and I've hinted at it, I think one of the key challenges for this plan is going to be effectively how we enable and support communities to effectively plan their own neighbourhoods. And one of the ideas that we're sort of developing, building upon some of that work that I've referred to earlier, is a cooperative approach to planning, a different relationship, I think, between the City Council, well, the City Council as the City Council, but the City Council as the local planning authority, and the relationship between the local planning authority and indeed other stakeholders, whether that be landowners or developers or whoever, but also the citizen. What is that relationship and how might that change in terms of a more collaborative and cooperative approach to planning? So, one of those ways in which we are trying to have that dialogue and discussion is this sofa. I thought it was the same sofa, but Hannah tells me we get a different sofa every week. So this sofa has been wandering around the city, and various people have sat on the sofa and had conversations about what they think this Plymouth Plan should address. And as the more eagle-eyed of you might have noticed, the sofa is outside the council chamber here. So in the break, you might want to take up residence on the sofa, and presumably Hannah or someone will speak to you about the issue that is uppermost in your mind. I'm sure that when Hannah first suggested this, she was talking about Tom Daly sat there, and that was how she persuaded me that we needed to get a sofa. But anyway, the idea being that we need to have a dialogue and a discussion without any preconceptions, without framing the nature of the discussion. The discussion being on the terms of the person who is having the dialogue with us. And here are some emerging thoughts, and I thought these were very interesting. I think all three of these quotes give an interesting perspective of local people about the issues. The first is quite a serious challenge, I would have said, to the quality and nature of homes that are being built. I mentioned the fuel poverty issue, but the quality of homes and how homes actually do or do not address the needs of the people that are being housed in them. So that's an interesting quote. I think the second quote is quite interesting. I guess implied in the observation is that perhaps brave decisions have not been made in the past. Everyone will perhaps have a view about that. But it was interesting that that observation was all about how there should be brave decisions made, and the plan that is put in place should be stuck to. And then finally, a very good quote which sort of shows how all these things are inevitably interlinked, and the point was made earlier about that. Fine, this person's been offered 2 jobs, which is obviously very positive, but there were real issues of childcare and transportation, which obviously made it not worthwhile for this person to take up those positions. So that's the timescale for the Plymouth Plan. The dialogue and the conversation has started. You'll have the opportunity to participate that during the debate, and indeed during conversations centred around these events. So you can see that we're moving towards what we call Plymouth Plan Convention in 2013, and then later on. And then sort of finally, I thought these were 2 quotes that I thought were very relevant. One is a well-known quote from Eisenhower about plans are nothing, it's all about planning, which obviously as a planner I particularly liked. But some may know of the American architect and planner Daniel Burnham. Sorry, that's gone off the slide there. But effectively extolling people to make plans that are themselves inspirational. I think, in essence, that's the challenge that faces us. So I'll be very interested to see what all of you think about what we've said today and what you think the key challenges are for Plymouth. As you've heard, you can follow us on Twitter and on some of those contacts there. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paul. Our next speaker is Isabel Allen. She's a director of design at Hab Housing. She's an architect. She's been the editor for the Architects Journal, which some of you might be aware of, and she has been a judge on a member of the jury, I should say, of the Sterling Prize. And Hab specialises in small development company building low-cost sustainable housing. So over to Hannah, who's going to add as well.
Not my thing. Hi. So I work for this company. Well, in fact, I am director of this company, HAB. I was saying earlier to Anthony, this is a bit of a midlife crisis lecture. I usually spend time convincing people that we're brilliant and trying to get investment. And I've decided today to tell you about all our cock-ups because I think they're more useful, actually, and we've made an awful lot. So I'm going to have to trust you not to try and dissuade anyone from investing in us because at the moment we need a lot of money. This is a vote of faith, this lecture, okay? So we set up, I suppose, 7 years ago now, and these are our core values. As you can see, we're quite good on vision. We do happiness, architecture and beauty. And actually, rather depressingly, what the first bit of this is going to argue is that vision is wonderful, but you mustn't forget the boring stuff. And I think we've been very guilty of that. So these are our key values. We wanted to build affordable housing, sustainable, contemporary, enjoyable, social, contextual. When we set up, it was the height of the boom, and all the volume house builders you know about were building. Most of it was a pretty generic product, mostly because you could sell absolutely anything because people could borrow anything, and it was buy-to-let mortgages and blah, blah, blah. So actually the contextual thing seemed quite radical, this sort of real plea that everything should go back to basics and be very much of its place and rethought through. Pretty much overnight, our first cock-up was timing. Pretty much overnight, the housing market fell apart, and that stopped being so radical, and the radical thing became to be able to build anything at all. So we realised there was no money, really, in the private sector, and we teamed up. We realised in the end that the housing associations were the really important people. Is there anyone here from a housing association? Hello. I'll talk to you afterwards. But I think they're fascinating for us because obviously, you know, as with anything, there's good ones, there's bad ones, all the rest of it. But if the fundamental principle that you build and you develop something that you're effectively responsible for forever, I think is absolutely key to regeneration, good building, sustainability, all these things. Any of the private developers we tried to team up with, once you hit the point where we wanted to spend maybe 10% more, or not even 10% more in terms of money, just an awful lot more effort and time to get something that was cheaper to run, that would last, that would make happy communities, it didn't work in their business models. Their business model is to spend as little money and as little time as possible on something and then get out and get on to the next thing. Housing associations have 100, 200, 300-year business models. They can make sense of that. If they think that, you know, it's going to last 100 years longer, the bills are going to be lower, the people are going to be happier, it works for them. So I think they're really key, you know, for any of these big visionary plans, actually. So, yes, sorry, I'm not mentioning our partners. That's very disloyal of me. So Hab Ocus is a joint venture between us and Green Square Group, who are a big West Country-based housing association. And the 3 projects I'm going to show you are all done as a joint venture with them. Now, I'm going to kick off with, God, sorry. See, this is why we cock up so much. Right, this was the first project we tried and failed. And right from the start, we knew we wanted to work with local authorities, and we wanted to work with towns or cities with a vision. And Swindon was interesting. I'll just stop there. Swindon was interesting. That's usually contentious in itself. But Swindon was interesting for three reasons, really. One, it had huge housing targets. Prescott had given it, I can't remember what now, but it was just building, and not particularly well. And we figured that if we could just kind of up the ante in terms of quality there, we'd be doing quite a good job. It also had a very, very progressive leadership. The council, they really wanted to be the green capital of Britain within the next 6 years or something, so that was interesting for us. And finally, it's a place where you test mass market. What would you test? Maybe, I don't know, a new brand of Tipex or something. You know, just a kind of mass market. It's got the average life expectancy, the average educational achievement, the average wage, so it's the kind of good, you know, we were very much positioning ourselves as mass market people. We knew that lots of kind of people much more glamorous than us, you kind of urban splashes and that lot, were doing lovely design-led stuff in London, Glasgow, you know, places where there was a kind of design glitterati and extra cash to pay for it, and people kept saying, yeah, but you can't do it in the kind of volume house builder land, you can't do it. So for us, the fact that we could argue that this was kind of a pretty standard place was really, really important. Anyway, so we found this project, which was a big regeneration project, and we're going to do 240 new homes, where you can see all the figures there. It all looked great. It was absolutely in tune with what the council were trying to achieve. What could possibly go wrong? This was the site, and you can see it's a big green space. It didn't even have a name. This project kept changing name, and it didn't have a name because nobody had ever really owned this open space. It was very neglected. There was kind of a changing room which there was an arson attack on. There There were always kind of shopping trolleys and what have you. People were scared, but people weren't crossing it. It was kind of almost too big for the neighbourhood it was serving, so it had become a barrier rather than a focus. It was always empty. And we figured that we got various grants and all sorts of people behind us. By building in the corner of it, we could basically generate £1 million worth of landscape work to the rest of it and sort out various environmental issues, like there's flooding, there's all sorts of things going on with the surrounding houses. Plus, the Swindon Council built an academy, which was sort of over here, which is wonderful, really an amazing building, amazing resources, but empty. So we were kind of building its catchment area, which would have a lovely walk through that central band of woodland, which was going to be a trim trail and a BMS track, and we were going to make it secure, and it was also going to be a wildlife corridor. And at the moment, that central bit is all just kind of gorse and thicket, and you can't actually see through it, so you never know how big that space was, but we were going to kind of cut these views through, so you got twice the park, and it was all looking wonderful. Oh, slides, hang on a minute, I'll come back to that. And we set about talking to people. The council kind of thought they'd done their consultation, as councils always do. We looked at the people we thought we had to talk to, the stakeholders. And I think going back to Anthony's very interesting point about single agendas, I think it's really useful. This is an exercise we always do. It's almost like battleships, but it's like these are the people who think it's their project. We think it's our project, but these people all think it's their project. And, you know, we've got in conversation with them all, and it's a useful diagram to show everyone, because everyone thinks it's just them. And actually, if you can get that on the table, they begin to understand why there's always going to have to be some give and take and everything. Anyway, we talked to them all, and we were kind of generating 106 money. Things were looking good. We looked up we worked with Glenn Howells, great architect, looked at a lot of examples of where housing has defined a public space by giving it overlooking and character, and in turn, of course, the public space adds to the value of housing, and you can completely up an area and realise values. We started looking at putting water and swales in to try and deal with all the flooding issues there were and to kind of add to the biodiversity. So this is water down the middle of a street. We were looking at European-style streets to bring back the sort of pedestrianism in the home zones. Do you know what we didn't do, or the council didn't do, we didn't do, nobody did, is dot our I's and cross our T's. So we kind of got this far, and we'd spoken to all those people, and just little things came out, and they're so boring. Even now, I don't even want to tell you because you'll just fall asleep. But it was, you know, little covenant strips of land, not quite working, access strips, bridle paths, all the usual stuff. Then there was a town and village green. Does anybody know about town and village green? Oh, you all. So the principle is basically like squatting. You know how if you have a house and you let your friend live in it, it's a huge mistake if you fall out because then they've got squatters' rights. So you charge them a peppercorn rent because then if you've given them permission, you can take it away. So town and village green is the same, but at a kind of civic scale. So if you've got a lovely park or a sports ground and you mow it and you put a sign up, at any point, pretty much, I know this is a gross simplification, but you can decide you're not going to. However, if you've just got a bit of land that you've never looked after and you've always ignored, and the odd person's brought their dog there, they can effectively claim squatters' rights. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because all the stuff that made this a good development plot, the stuff, you know, everyone's scared to use it, it's never been looked after, suddenly made us very vulnerable to that. So all these legal things kicked in, and we stopped talking because we got really scared. We just didn't understand our legal position, and our lawyers were advising us to stop talking, and we got all these people all excited about different things, and we went a bit quiet, and it was a total disaster. And the thing is, it is great to communicate, but I think what we've learned is the timing is absolutely key, and you have to do your homework first. Because actually, we built up a community. I mean, the old hippie in me thinks it's absolutely brilliant, because you kind of go in, there's nothing like a bit of opposition to bring a community together. People love it now. They all think they've got a brilliant park. They all go and have picnics there. But you don't really have a sustainable business model if we're going to spend our whole life investing in projects, which we then have to walk away from. And this moment, there was kind of rumblings. This moment was the moment I knew we had to give up. We kept talking about, and I think always in big regeneration projects, you know, they're a leap of faith. You invest time and money for years in this case. I don't want to tell you how much money. And they only happen because you embark on something irrational, and it's very hard to know when to walk away, and we're getting much better at it. But this headline, this was absolute genius, because the whole argument that nobody knows it's there, it doesn't have a name, suddenly becomes a positive thing. Suddenly it's paradise. You know, it's the secret Garden of Eden. It's kind of too good to have a name. it's ours. In other words, it's not ours, we're intrusive. And the paving was fabulous because we'd worked out this massive SUD strategy, and we'd been working with Wiltshire Wildlife to get this kind of woodland corridor and It was very much landscape-led, but suddenly it just looks like we're trying to turn it into the Brunswick Centre. And we were dead at that point, basically. I'll spare you the details. But well, I will tell you how much we lost. We lost nearly £100,000 on that, which for a kind of new business, it's not great. So, moving on. So, in the meantime, mostly really to keep our consultants in business, we did something much smaller, and this really kind of sneaked in under the radar, and it was down the road, and it's called The Triangle. You may have seen it because there was a TV programme about it. And we just got on with this one, really. And we looked at this business about contextual. We're very kind of determinedly low-key. I think what we do is the porridge, really, of the architectural world. But you want it to have a resonance and a meaning and all those things. And Swindon is cars, really. That's most people's experience of it. It's built up on car manufacturing. So, like every good historian, we kind of picked and chose. And we went back a layer to this history, because there's another story of Swindon which is much more romantic and in a way much more appropriate to kind of sustainable era, which of course is the great railway history. And I'm sure you all know this, but Isambard Kingdom Brunel picks Swindon. It's absolute midpoint between Bristol and London, so it's, this great engineering pedigree. And he built these, which are lovely, and they were for the railway workers. And I think what was really nice for us is when we asked people in Swindon, first off, when we said, where do you want to live, the depressing thing was that there didn't seem to be an aspirational part of town. They were kind of like, well, if we made it, we'd move out, because Swindon's surrounded by these lovely Cotswold villages, and that was the aspirational part, and that all seemed soul-destroying. But actually, these kept coming up again and again, and you can see they're beautifully looked after. And there's something very nice. There's a kind of, determinedly egalitarian social housing provider. There's something rather lovely about working in a city where the most desirable housing is this very humble building stock. So we set about trying to do a sort of contemporary take on that. That's really what we commissioned Glenn to do. We came up with that. And she's pretty much what we built. There you go, kind of. And you can see the proportions and the scale and all those things are, nothing new. It's what they were doing all those years ago. We took quite, I won't kind of talk about this for ages because I don't think it's really what today's about, but we took quite a lot of trouble on the detailing because we were working very, very cheaply at social housing budgets, and we weren't subsidised. Actually, it's not true. We had a grant from the DECC to use hempcrete, so that was the subsidy, but it was the only subsidy. But things like, actually these are arts and crafts tricks, really. Like if you look at the roof, it's the kind of cheapest roof tile around, but we specified 3 different kinds and laid them in a herringbone pattern, which actually means they've got to be laid absolutely perfectly, or you can tell the minute there's a shoddy job. It just kind of stands out. So that was quite a good trick. Chimneys are wind cowls, really chunky, oversized rainwater goods to just try and define each house as a separate unit rather than you've just got a slice of something else. And the render, I don't know, can you see there are different colour renders there? I'll go back. We took that palette is from the immediate surroundings. It's in a kind of very hodgepodgey mix of sort of mostly 30s, quite suburban architecture. But I love that zeitgeist thing. When you go to the seaside and everything's a kind of different colour, but actually they're all from the same sherbety palette. And there's this thing when you go through that part of Swindon where it kind of looks ad hoc, but there is something at work, which is people know the appropriate colour range. And we kind of did a palette of that, so it kind of sat in there and used that for our render. And we had very little space. So what we did, I don't know if this is what you found with your research, this is Housing Association, but one of the things our Housing Association, the other thing about Housing Associations is they have so much data and research because they keep, they're always involved in the users, so they just give you chapter and verse on what works and what doesn't, which is so useful for a housing developer. But they kept saying to us, it's like swimming pools, everybody thinks they want a really deep swimming pool, but actually they don't. Everybody thinks they want a big garden, but the reality is unless you have a gardener or a lot of money or a lot of spare time or whatever, you kind of use the first couple of metres and then the rest starts menacing you. It's just kind of a bit overgrown and there's kind of compost at the end, all the rest of it. And the Housing Association were very open to this idea of exploring shared spaces. The houses will have their own garden, but they're small. And then you could do shared spaces and you hope that the people who want to look after them and maintain them will, and people can use them. So this had a kind of central village green where the kind of kids can play and they have big do's, but then very modest space. But because of the sort of central village green, this space at the front of the house felt really important because there's a kind of enforced sociability. And you just think, actually, you've got to give people their privacy. There's got to be a sense that you can wash your car without absolutely having to be kind of on show. And these spaces had to work very hard. We had this thing about bikes as well. That was the other thing. The Housing Association were great on. They had all this thing about, they kept giving people free bikes and, really trying to encourage it. And people would ride for a week, but then they'd stop. And actually, when we looked into it, the big thing was people would ride their bike until the first rainy day that they'd had to take it through the house. When you have to take your bike from the front to the back, you get it out. And then you sort of carpet's a bit mucky, and then it's out the back. And then next day, you mess on the carpet, muddy bike, you just get a cab or a bus or whatever. So we knew we wanted bikes at the front of the house and just there, and we wanted you to just see them every day and for it to be easy to get them up and down. So we kind of devised this, and actually everyone there has got a bike now and has it up there. It's almost like keeping up with the Joneses. It's kind of part of the decoration. So that worked, that really worked. So spalliated fruit trees, we do an awful lot with edible landscape. And then in the corner there's these shared kitchen gardens. We got into all sorts of trouble with, some people thinking they're doing all the work, usual thing. And in fact, at the moment, I think it's quite good. I think at the moment, the gardening club are gardening, but on Saturday morning, they have a market stall in the village green bit in the middle, and they sell the produce really cheaply. So everyone kind of feels like they're getting it, but it's sort of working. But I'm sure it won't, things are never smooth. That's Kevin McLeod. He's one of my co-directors. You may know him. He presents Grand Designs. But, so we rather cynically do wheel him out at crucial moments. Got to use what you've got. Now, I really wanted to show you this because I think there's this whole thing about, consultation. We all know at the early stages it's important, but it's how you kind of communicate all the way through. And one of the things we really didn't want to do is a sort of bog standard user manual when you move into a new house. And our landscape architect produced this. And it's a gorgeous book. It's sort of a cookery book, and it's sort of a user's manual. It basically tells you all the fruit and veg available on the site and what you can do with it, how you look after it, recipes for different times of year to eat it. Because it's just, changing habits and letting people know what they've got. Anyway, this was in the Architect's Journal, actually, and we were... I don't know if this shows a terrible lack of ambition, but we felt it was a real victory to get a commonplace headline because it was just trying to do something very normal and low-key. We had loads of... the building process was awful. We had loads of snag issues and everything else. But anyway, basically, I think it's quite a good place, and it's done now, which is great. Anyway, moving on to Stroud. This is on site at the moment, and this is 78 houses. And Stroud's an interesting place because it kind of has that Totnes-y kind of slow towny thing going on. It also has a very established, very conservative with a small C population who hate that. So slightly schizophrenic. But actually the kind of slightly alternative thing is bringing in the life and the younger generation and all these sort of things, and it's very positive, and they want to embrace it. Anyway, the project we got, which was a HCA site, is this, which was a hospital. So that is the hospital. That's the footprint of it. Oh, yes. Sorry. You can see, this again is an interesting thing about consultation because the HCA thought they'd done, and they had done, and they'd paid through the nose for it, a very extensive consultation exercise. I'm absolutely convinced that nobody cared about this hospital, really happy for us to bulldoze it, which did seem a bit unlikely and, of course, wasn't true. And I think one of the things I was talking to Anthony about earlier is you can consult and consult and consult in the abstract, and you can have documents out in the public realm. Actually, until the moment somebody thinks you're going to take a bulldozer to something or build something in their view or in their water school, very few people really get up and have a voice. And there is a moment for it. And unfortunately, it's later in the process and is useful for people like us who want to plan. But anyway, the minute this kind of became a reality, it became apparent people loved this hospital. We've become slightly cleverer about consultation at this point and managed to channel the conversation into, okay, which bit of it? You know, we cannot afford to keep it all, and we really couldn't. It didn't convert. I mean, we did try. We did look at it. Couldn't get the densities, couldn't convert it to the kind of environmental standards we needed, all the rest of it. Didn't work. But we figured we could take a hit on something. And it's funny, because I know you were sort of saying, oh, it's really good to, you know, not to have a general conversation, let people talk about what they want, but I think there's a point where you just have to be very clear about this is the conversation we can have with you. And actually it was great. They really responded to it. And what was kind of painful in a way, but helpful, was, to me personally, and probably to most people in this room, the good building, the really special building, was, you see the one that looks like a sort of angel of the north at the top. It's a lovely little colonial thing. It was beautifully made. No one cared about that. It had been an infectious diseases unit. It had been mostly kind of soldiers who'd been serving abroad that had seen it. It's invisible from the road. No one ever went there. No one ever visited it. It was infectious diseases, so nobody'd been inside it. What they all cared about was this one down here, which is a horrible old Victorian building, nothing particularly special about it, but it had been a nurse's home. It's just amazing how many people's first date had been with someone from the nurse's home. All these romantic memories of the kind of the first kiss and all this sort of thing. So it was really special, and you could see it from the road. So it was, you know, what people, in terms of placemaking, that was what they wanted. So, sorry, that's what they've got. There it is. We're refurbishing it as we speak. So I think it's a really interesting conversation about architectural value, because it's good to have experts, it's good to have historians. Of course, there is an intrinsic thing, which is architectural value. Actually, if you're doing a neighbourhood community-led project, I don't know, does it? I think it probably does. Well, we took the view, it got outweighed by sentimental value and nostalgia and all those things, placemaking. I hate this building, but we're building it. But so that's another thing, isn't it, that comes with consultation. The extent to which, I mean, in a sense, you have a job which is harnessing everything into something you want to stand by aesthetically. But this, I think, you know, this goes back to the business of kind of visioning and planning. One of the things that had been identified for this project was that it needed a community centre. Of course, what happens is people come in and they look within a red line, and everyone says they want a community centre, like everybody wants a park and everybody wants... Actually, there was a community centre just across the road that was really struggling. So we took the view to give the money to them and have all our site meetings there every week and all our consultation, and kind of give the existing community centre a boost, and not to build a community centre, but to build something like this, although it didn't look like this when we drew it, which is just an allotment building. We've got allotments on this project, which is lovely. So it's just enough to kind of store things, wash your hands, have a barbecue, have a party if the weather permits. A very light touch thing. But we gave it to the Community Land Trust to design, and this is what they want. So it's kind of what they're going to get, I think. Anyway, I think what was interesting about this project, actually, was that we did absolutely start from the landscape, and this is our master plan, and I don't know if you can read that key, but it's just types of landscape. It's not types of house or tenure or anything else. It's edible landscape, wild landscape, whatever it is. In fact, we always now have our landscape architect on first, before the architect. He's the master planner. Everything comes from the land. So these are the pictures. This is how we talked about it. This is going back to our thing about the little gardens and big gardens. The houses have tiny back gardens. This time we've kind of turned it around. They've got little gates that open straight onto this big orchard. It's the allotments. Kevin opening the allotments. He does do other things too. He doesn't just turn up on the nice days. And this is how we're marketing it. So you may notice you haven't actually seen the houses yet. This is all about a way of life. It's on the edge of Stroud. And I guess we had a choice, which you could either say, well, it's kind of on the edge. You know, who wants to move to the edge of a town? And actually what we've really tried to push is the fact that Stroud is very attractive to people who are into walking, cycling. Lots of people moving from London. You know, you're closer to nature. We've got this wildlife corridor. We've got the allotments. So in a way, although I think actually the housing's very nice, it's much more about this. There's a badger set which we've kept. The way, this is the marketing brochure. These are the birds you can see on site in spring, electric bike club, what you can do, where you can cycle to. In summer there's music festivals. There's a recipe there, which is a paella that you can cook on that little thing in the allotment building with as many vegetables as people have got from the allotments. You know, blah, blah. You get the general idea. So it's very much pushing a vision of what the city can be and kind of playing to its strengths. So it's not like, well, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's like, oh, look, it can be this kind of life. But that's the hoardings, same sort of story. This was an event we had at the weekend, which is coming and helping replant the trees and testing out the electric bikes. And anyway, so that's that. Oxford, last one. 3 projects in Oxford. This is very much a city council vision, and that's what you can see. It's much more urban altogether. Basically, it's a charity called Emmaus, which is a fabulous, fabulous charity, which, what does it do? It trains ex-cons to restore old furniture. So it's kind of, you know, it recycles people, it recycles furniture that would otherwise go to landfill. You know, it's a kind of great charity. At the moment, it's in a very residential bit of town. Actually, it just needs footfall. It just needs people past it. So that ground floor is theirs, and that's a very busy high street, and we're building new workshops. But again, this thing about consultation, this is Alfred Hallman and Morris Architects. The last one was Deborah Saunt, DSDHA. Alfred Hall came out with this wonderful thing. We kind of thought, we've got this huge furniture workshops, and we'll make this big theatrical shop window, and it'll be all this, you know, what do we call it, live street facade, and blah, blah, blah. And then we talked to Emmaus a bit late, and they were just like, we've all been in prison for the last 20 years. Like, the last thing we want is to feel we're being watched or we're, you know, on display. And of course, it's kind of obvious, but we just, you know, you come from an architecture school, you have a different view of it. Anyway, that's where their offices are, their factories at the moment, very residential part of town, so we're just doing apartments on there to make the sums work, basically. This is nearby. This is now a new sports and community centre, which you need because we've got all-added housing, and there's some housing in the background, so on and so forth. This is the hoardings. I think you can do a whole big thing with hoardings of just creating a sense of something quite fun happening. We now use hoardings as community. Well, this is an art project. This is kind of portraits by a local photographer of local residents. We do all sorts of things with them. But, consultation, blah, 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 blah. We do anything to avoid the situation where we're on a stage and everyone else is sitting there. Absolutely anything, because I think no good ever comes of it. So we're quite big on these newspapers that people can kind of take away and read in their own time. Now, this is quite interesting, because if you look at the slides I showed you before, the architecture is quite bold, and this is actually quite a traditional part of Oxford. And I think we learned a bit of a lesson, really, from the first project, where in a way we kind of showed people these amazing schemes, and they were just kind of like, so what? And in a way, this is so trite, because all you're really saying is, oh, look, there are sloping roofs, and we're doing some too. It's kind of ridiculous, but there is a process of just showing that it doesn't stem from nowhere. You know, it is rooted in things that are familiar. And then we kind of drew it up like that. And the roof, I know it looks very willful, but it was quite good in terms of sort of rights to light and views through and those sorts of things. And then we drew it like that, and then we made a model of it. And in the end, people are loving it. And actually, I think if we'd showed them these pictures straight off, they would have said, too modern, too big, too brash, forget it. So maybe it's a very cynical exercise, but I like to think it's more a taking people with us and constructive dialogue. I guess there's always a balance. So this is in for planning at the moment. We're waiting to hear. And that's the end. And these just came today, which is why they're kind of tagged on the end. This is the event at the weekend. I think a really important thing is people are very cynical if you're consulting while you're trying to get planning permission. I think in terms of building ongoing links with the community, it's really important to keep it up when you don't need them anymore. And it's a pain in the arse to do it, because actually it's exhausting and you don't really want to, but I think it's really worth it, and we've sort of started really making a big thing of it. And this is in Stroud, when you saw the hospital. And this is the weekend. This is planting out the trees, local community. We're testing out the electric bikes for the bike club. Yeah, you can see what it is, looking at the electric car. And, that felt great. We didn't actually need anything from them. They didn't really need anything from us, but it's just a sign of actually there is a conversation and we're acknowledging it. That is the end of mine. Thank you very much.